Hungry Trilobyte podcast would like to start by acknowledging Soonercon. Join us for Oklahoma's premier pop culture convention. Soonercon returns June 20th through 22nd, 2025. This will be the 33rd year for Soonercon, and this year will bring even more cosplay, celebrity guests, kids' workshops, gaming, comic art, and after-hours events. Visit Soonercon.com for details.
Back tonight, we have Jarrod Alberich. How are you doing, my good sir?
Hey, Aaron, man, it's good to be back. I always enjoy my time here at Fort Bossig, and looking forward to talking about some Joe stuff with you tonight.
I really am. I feel a little silly. This is one of those cases where I'm coming into a fandom on the back end. I am trying to play catch up now.
All right.
Okay, because like everybody in our age group, I know you've got a year or two on me, but I still consider you to be in my age group here. We played with the 3 and 7 75 inch GI Joe figures, totally into that. I got out of it fairly early on and just kind of decided it was going to be not a priority in my life. And then this thing comes along and I have to get back in.
There was at the Sergeant Slaughter's. What is the name of that vehicle?
Oh, is there? Okay. Is there a name? I don't especially know, but
I'm gonna remember.
Okay. For the benefit of the people that are not seeing it right now, this is a GI Joe scale transformer that includes 2 Joe figures with it, and I absolutely love this idea so much. I said this has to be what gets me back into this. There are 3 others in this series. I will have to pick them up, but this was the one that made me say I'm going to pre-order this on Amazon.
That's a transformer?
Yes.
Okay. That vehicle is called the Triple T.
Yes, it is.
And yeah, it originally came out in, I think, 86 with Sergeant Slaughter. When you held it up, I thought you had an OG 86 Triple T.
No. Okay. And it does transform, and the transformer is Kup.
All right.
Okay. And now I will also tell you, I will transform it in front of you because this is beyond a shadow of a doubt the most complicated transformer I have ever owned.
They seem to have gotten more and more complicated over the years. I remember buying some that came out in like 2002, 2003-ish time frame. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna buy these transformers. They kind of had a research about that time. So did He-Man and GI Joe, and I got them home, and I was like, I'm gonna transform. It took me like half an hour to transform it one guy. I was like, what the heck? So I understand.
Yeah, it's kind of what we're at here. And I actually needed the instructions. The instructions weren't that great, so I was winging it at some point. And yeah. So, but I love the thing. It's a fantastic idea. I love the fact they actually managed to fuse the 2 together in terms of scale. And Transformers, as you know, has always just been a scale mess.
Oh yeah, not a lot of consistency there.
Yeah, but to actually make it not consistent, not only with itself, but with a completely different line, was like, I got to get in on this.
That's pretty cool. So this is your introduction to. Well, you say you dabbled in it in your youth.
In my youth, yes.
Do you kind of remember what you had going on as far as toy? Were you maybe a cartoon kid or a comic kid, or what was that? I turned your show around. I'm interviewing you.
Okay, I was the model. For the time I was buying, I was the model customer for Hasbro because I didn't need the cartoon. I didn't need the comic. I would literally just go to the store and be like, that looks cool. I want that. And that was how I bought all my Transformers. I didn't even worry about what their specialties were. My GI Joes, I'm sorry. All my GI Joes. I would be like, I didn't care what their specialties were or what they were doing. Like, this guy's cool, this guy's cool, this guy's cool. And it's like, I had the Sergeant Slaughter's Warthog and the Rolling Thunder. It's like, I just wanted something that I could put them into that they could ride around it. And it's like, it didn't matter to me as long as it looked cool.
Nice.
Yes.
I like it. You're just going off of whatever it is you like, whatever the look of it is. I dig it.
And to be fair, a lot of this probably came down to the fact that I was a kid without a lot of money. GI Joes were a fairly inexpensive toy, so I was just trying to get what I liked without having to worry about the details.
I see. Okay, that's cool, man. That's pretty cool. I hadn't thought about the Warthog in forever, by the way.
That was the toy. When I was like first grade, that was the Joe toy.
All right. Yeah, I think the Warthog is like you said, I'm a little older than you. I want to say Warthog is like 87, 88 time frame.
That's about right. Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
All right. All right. It's all coming together. Yeah, that's cool, man. Yeah, I started on Joe in 82 when the line came out. You know, I have an older brother who's 5 years older than me, Jason the Weasel Skull. He podcasts with us over on our network, and it was just an easy transition because I was about 5 and he was about 10, and he had the big brother influence, and he was like, we got to start collecting these GI Joe figures. All right.
Yeah, yeah.
Jason had to make the transition from Star Wars to GI Joe,
Uh-huh.
which maybe you didn't have to deal with because you're a little younger than me.
Yeah. See, for me, it was like G.I. Joe. He-Man when I was very, very young. I have a very, very fuzzy memory of He-Man. It was He-Man to G.I. Joe to Real Ghostbusters to Ninja Turtles.
Not well. That is a good lineup right
Yeah.
there. That is a good line because let me tell you something. Over there, just a couple rooms from where I'm sitting right now, I have a huge display case. It's custom made. It's one of my favorite things, and it's just full of my GI Joe collection, except for the bottom shelf,
Mhm.
which is full of my Real Ghostbusters collection, which is shockingly extensive. And then I have some shelves around the corner in the living room that has my older, first few generations of Turtles collection figures. So
Mhm.
we have a lot in common with that shares. And then my wife was the big He-Man and She-Ra collector. She has a huge He-Man and She-Ra collection. So you would have a great time hanging out at my house. Just stop by whenever you want to.
I am definitely looking forward to doing that, and I'm not kidding you in the slightest.
Yes.
There are people who will vouch for this. I will just show up one day. I'll actually let you know I'm coming, but you might not get a lot of warning.
Hey, it's fine. You are welcome here, my friend.
Yeah. So here's the thing, like bearing in mind that this was the path I had, I want to know kind of where you're falling into. Because, okay, for the benefit of the people who don't really follow this stuff, because you might be listening for whatever reason, G.I. Joe very broadly had a three-part history in the franchise. There was the original 12-inch figures that came out in, the post-World War II era. There's the smaller plastic, just under 4-inch figures that you and I are talking about. And there was this really weird phase in between the two of them where they were just throwing anything against the wall to see if it stuck. And that didn't last more than like 2 or 3 years. It was the can this franchise survive phase. But we're definitely looking at the 3.75-inch figures strongly.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
The 12 inchers are a little before my time. Like you said, it's about a 60s thing. And you're right. The 70s, they tried like action, I think they call it Adventure Team.
That's the
Like,
name of it. I couldn't think of it.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they dabble. And then they basically in 82, they were just like, hey, let's relaunch. For anybody who's listening, who's like, hey, I kind of want a crash course on sort of G.I. Joe, gotta recommend the Netflix Toys That Made Us. I mean, they made the Toys That Made Us made a ton of great toy documentaries, one of which is GI Joe. Highly recommend you guys check it out. But yeah. They just decided to relaunch. I think they were influenced by Star Wars, if I remember correctly. They wanted that scale.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, well, we've got this license. Let's bring back the military toys, and it just, I mean, it was the early 80s. Military movies were becoming popular again. I think it just hit at the right time. I think it really did. It was that sort of Reagan era flag waving, yo Joe kind of time, and it set very nicely. It's just really good timing. And like you said, it was very much He-Man and GI Joe that were just dominating the boys toy market, and somewhat tapping into the girls market as well, because He-Man had She-Ra, which blended nicely, and GI Joe never shied away from female characters. Like every year, there in every line there's at least one every year in every line. And yeah, I could run my mouth about some GI Joe. So you got the guy here.
That's why I have you here. Now, I did drop something into the chat here just because I said I can't transform this thing in front of you, but I wanted you to see what it was like when the Triple T turned into Kup.
Oh, I can't wait. I can't
Okay.
wait. Oh, there I see. I'm learning how to use this. Got it. Oh, he looks so cool as a robot.
Yeah.
And in that picture, which includes Leatherneck and Sergeant Slaughter, those are 3 3/4.
Yes.
Oh, that is incredible. Yeah, great scaling, like you said. In fact, I just did my last convention appearance. I usually quiet my convention appearances come about October, so it was like the last week of September. I did JoeLanta, the GI Joe theme show in Atlanta, as you probably pieced together. And Sergeant Slaughter himself was there, so I got to
Oh,
say hey to the Sarge and chat with him for a bit, and it was a fun show. But I did not see that cool toy. That is so super sweet, man.
and it's talking about, the era of the 80s and, the jingoism coming along and the Reaganism coming along and whatever terms you want. As I look at the stuff that I might want to put back into my collection, I love the fact that from that point forward, whoever G.I. Joe was fighting was the enemy of the weak in the real world. Like we started out with Cobra, and they were like the terrorists because we didn't really want to have a specific country we were fighting. That was just not something that you wanted to put on kids, but this generic terrorist organization that was
Mhm.
causing trouble. And then they kind of morphed. It's like, well, we're fighting drug dealers because that becomes the thing in the late 80s. Like drugs are responsible for all the problems we have. And like a year and a half later, it was like, well, now they're environmental evildoers, and we're trying.
Yeah, it was like Eco Warriors
Yes,
line of GI Joes. Yeah.
we're fighting pollution, and that.
Yeah, it had a real evolution like that. It's going back to the 82, like you said, that very first line. It's almost the Joes are almost kind of boring because they're all very OD green. They're very similar. The only standouts on the Joe side are Snake Eye, Stalker, and Scarlet. Snake Eyes in his all black, Stalker being the camo outfit with the beret, and of course Scarlet being the female with her unique outfit as well. And the vehicles and everything are very uh, uh, analogous to actual military stuff. And then as it goes, it gets a little bit wilder and a little bit more creative. And that's where I think I really enjoy it because you get to play in this military toy line, or if you're reading the comics, a military comic book that's like 80% military and 20% sci-fi. So you don't have to take it too seriously. Like you said,
Right.
Cobra is not a serious villain that you would find out in the world. It was just goofy enough to make it not depressing in any way to play it. And then, like you said, you got the Eco Warriors line that comes along in the early 90s, which I think is a total response to one part Captain Planet and a lot of parts Turtles. Like Turtles began to dominate the market. And when that happens, you'll notice the G.I. Joes start getting oozy and toxicy and bright colors. And it's very much trying to tap into the turtle market by that time. So it is interesting to watch it evolve.
And that Cobra literally become literal snake people when they get to that point.
Yeah, they introduced Cobra Law in like 87 or so. And yeah, it's such a neat line. I think it's like, again, I think its real beauty is that it makes military toy playing fun. You get all the fun sides of the military and not so
Mhm.
much the downsides.
And I'll tell you the thing that's disappointed me most, and the thing that probably, if this wasn't the case, I would have been into Joe like 5 years earlier. But there is a line of GI Joes I love that is not available in the scale that I prefer. But I truly do enjoy when they take actual people and make GI Joes of them. Like
Oh, go on.
as the 12-inch figures, there is a Bob Hope, there's a Colin Powell, there's a Teddy Roosevelt. If I
Yes.
could have a Teddy Roosevelt this size, I would have had it the day it rolled off the assembly line.
No, you're absolutely right. I just a fun personal story is I taught leadership classes in the Air Force for 3 years in Maxwell Air Force Base, which is in Montgomery, Alabama. And it's a big hub for officer training and leadership development. So the cool part about that is we bring in a lot of guest speakers. We brought in a ton of guest speakers, famous people, Medal of Honor winners, I got to meet a lot of cool folks like that. And they bring in, there was a guy who came every class because he's just down, because Montgomery's not far from Tuskegee. Colonel Carter from the Tuskegee Airmen would come and speak to every class.
That's cool.
And they did the 12-inch Joe of the Tuskegee Airmen, and you bet your bottom dollar I picked that up. And the next time I saw him, I was like, would you autograph this one for me? And he did. And it's just a really fun and cool moment of history. That man was, he was hanging in there. He was like 174 years old or something. I don't know, but he was hanging in there, and he was a great speaker. Anyway, I derailed us because, I agree. They had General Eisenhower and they had a bunch of people in the 12-inch. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and Brandon, in this scale, you can get a couple of athletes and some wrestlers, and that is cool. I'm not going to say it's not. But I mean, I really would like to have that real aspect mixed in with, like you said, the fantasy military element that I'm putting into this as well.
Yeah, you're right about you've obviously have a good familiarity with G.I. Joe, because you talk about wrestlers. You got Sergeant Slaughter. You got Refrigerator Perry had his own action figure for G.I. Joe.
Roddy Piper.
I did. Yeah, that's right. I forgot. He came later. He came in like early mid 2000s. I forgot he got a figure. And then of course there's for those of you who want to get deep in the weeds, they had a planned Rocky Balboa figure. Rocky was going to be a member of G.I. Joe, so much so that he actually appeared in one of the comic books, like it was like one of those files of G.I. Joe, Order of Battle type of thing. He was in there, and then it didn't come to fruition. And I've never really seen a good reason why. He went from Rocky Balboa to they changed the mold a bit, and he became the Cobra figure Big Boa, who was just a masked villain. I've always suspected though that it was because Rambo hit, and then Rambo got his own toy line. So I'm betting that they got the likeness rights to Stallone, and therefore Hasbro couldn't use. That's my suspicion. Remember the Rambo dolls? They were a little bigger than Joe.
Yep.
They were probably a 5 or 6 incher. Yeah.
Yeah, I did see that. I had a secondhand one that I got long after it was relevant. It was cool to have, but just wasn't my thing. I mean, it would be ages till I would ever actually see Rambo, so it had no particular relevance to me.
Back in the 80s when R-rated movies got cartoons and action figure lines, heck yeah. Those Rambo figures were cool. I don't want to get it too far afield from G.I. Joe, but I liked them. Oh.
And I mean, and this is something I really dug even as a kid, but it was like G.I. Joe was as I say in the intro of the show, the most elite military unit that our country has. And apparently you have to be the best of the best of the best to get in there. You have to exemplify everything their training requires. And as a bonus of this, they have absolutely no dress code.
Oh yeah, none at all.
If you want to dress in a football jersey, it's cool. If you want to have a kilt, no problem. You want to walk around in swim fins, be our guest.
Once you get that elite, you get to pick everything. And again, that was, that first 82 line, really Scarlet was the only one that was odd, super odd. Because again, they were all sort of an OD green uniforms. Stalker had the camo, so that set them apart, but that was still a real uniform. Snake Eyes had the full black thing going on, but as far as like a Black Ops or a Navy SEAL, that wouldn't be too out of line. But Scarlet's was definitely a unique look. I think they just felt like they had room to play because it was the girl. And but then by like you said, waves 2 and 3, you started seeing the football jerseys and the whatever. Most of those figures were designed by a guy named Ron Rudat, and I got to spend a little time with him at a Joe Con a couple of years ago. His table was right next to mine. Just a super creative guy, that just, he was like, yeah, they kind of loosened the reins and let us have fun with the development. And again, I think that's what truly makes G.I. Joe fun, because again, I'm a combat veteran myself. So when I get in there and I read a military comic, especially, they make the ones that are like the realistic ones, and I don't feel particularly drawn to those. I don't definitely feel like I need to relive any of the drama, but I love getting into G.I. Joe because you get the fun part of being in the military and not the I mentioned earlier, not the depressing part.
Sure. And this is kind of why you were my guy when I had to bring here, just despite the fact that you have this encyclopedic knowledge of G.I. Joe, which you do, but you've told me several times offline that that becoming a soldier was your way of fulfilling your dream of being on the GI Joe team.
Absolutely. I've told
And
this to Larry Hama too.
And I will say, you know, being the Trekkie I am, with my flag hanging right behind me here, my way of joining Starfleet is to simply have the adventures I have in the world, to do the exploring I can in the world. So I want to hear your equivalent of that. I want to hear how putting on that uniform in real life and serving our country, and thank you very much for that, served this dream you had as a child.
Yeah. First of all, it is the greatest honor of my life to serve the country. So I appreciate your appreciation, sir. Um, it was so weird to me because, especially as I look back on it now as an almost 50-year-old man, when I was a kid, there was nothing else I wanted to do. My dad was a soldier. He was a helicopter pilot in the Army, and GI Joe was the hottest thing on TV, and I watched the cartoon, I read the comics, and I had the toys, and I just like, and being in a military community, like, I did with my father, that's what everybody around us, all my friends were into GI Joe. And it's even more realistic to us in the military community because GI Joe did something really smart from day one. They made the Joe team look like a real military team, different ethnicities, male, female, black, white, Italians, dude from California. I'm just kind of going off the top of my head, remembering all the people, Native Americans, like all their first original runs of Joe, really diverse group. And that's the group of friends I had because there's a military community, which is a really diverse group. So it's just all ringing true, and everyone's having fun, and everybody loves G.I. Joe and military stuff. When we're not playing with our figures, we're playing guns and building forts out in the woods and all that. So all my life, I just was like, I just want to be in the military. And it's funny because every once in a while on social media, I'll see somebody post, "Hey, what was that? What was your dream job when you were a kid? Like, I want to be a fireman or a spaceman or whatever." Mine was literally from probably 7 years old, 6 or 7. I want to be an officer in the military. And the really great part about that is when I was 22 years old, I got commissioned and I fulfilled my dream. But as I tell everybody else, the downside of that is if you fulfill your dream at 22, there's a lot more life after that. You gotta figure something else out. So, but yeah, I mean, I it's funny you mentioned that. You have an uncanny ability to see it inside of people sometimes. But you talk about putting on the uniform for the first time. I remember putting on uniform first time in JROTC in high school, and just and feeling like it felt so right. And then putting on I ended up being in the Air Force. I put on the Air Force uniform for the first time when I went to ROTC in college, and then putting on my uniform for the first time that had, second lieutenant bars on it for real. Like I'm really in the military. And all three of those were just highly memorable and wonderful moments for me. And now there's two funny parts of it. One is I achieved my life dream at the age of 22. Now I got to figure out what the heck I'm gonna do the rest of my life. And then now I have kids. I have 2 boys, one of which is a freshman in college right now. The other one's in 4th grade. And I've asked them both separately on separate occasions, "Hey, do you have any interest at all in being in the military?" And I'll never forget when my oldest son, I asked him when he was probably about 13 or 14, "You have any interest to join the military?" He said, "No, not really." And I thought, I'm a modern dad. I'm not going to pressure him or anything, but there's a part of me inside that thought, maybe I wonder if I did something wrong. you know, I never, I never like, I had the most practical kids in the world. I don't want to get shot. It never occurred to me that I could be shot when, when I was growing up. I was like, I just wanted to be in the military. So yeah, and as I mentioned, I did, as many people have, told Larry Hama at conventions and stuff, "Hey, you're the reason I joined the military." And every time you tell him that, he always apologizes. He's, "I'm so sorry." I'm so sorry. For those of you listening who don't know, I don't mean to talk down anybody, but Larry Hama is basically the guy that created the universe of G.I. Joe. He is the original writer on the comic book. He's written literally hundreds of issues of the comic. He wrote almost all the original file cards. So basically, you got Ron Rudat, who's doing physical design, Larry Hama, who's building the story and then the characters around all this, and that's what made G.I. Joe. There's tons of other people behind the scenes, so I'm just kind of Cliff's notes for the listeners.
Sure.
Yeah. So I ran my mouth there again. So thanks for having me.
And I will let you know, Jarrod, for about maybe 5 seconds. There was a very serious audio glitch there, so
Oh no. Well,
I think we got everything. I could probably edit around it if we didn't, but just want to let you know, if there's something weird happens, that's why.
it's all right.
Okay. But yeah, and so did it affect your perception at all to know that, again, there was this fantasy element from G.I. Joe that wasn't going to come through in the real world?
I guess maybe a little. Um, I mean, I had a good sense of what the real military was like, thanks to with my father and all that. So I had a pretty good grip on the reality of it. Um, but it's always neat, especially because I was in more of the technology side, special technologies, kind of real neat technologies that the military has and uses, and that made it more fun because it's real cool and unique stuff that not the general public doesn't even know about. That feels a little more GI Joey. It's a little more sci-fi, so that did make it more fun. But luckily, even though I sort of had the stars in my eyes, no pun intended, about being in the military, a lot due to my dad, my environment, GI Joe. I mean, let's throw in Rambo and military movies again, like we were talking about, kind of had a resurgence in the 80s. And yeah, so I had all that influence, and luckily I had a grounded part of it as well, mostly probably thanks to my father and my older brother, who also joined the army. So luckily I didn't get too lost in the in the stars and in the eyes. But yeah, I do remember definitely getting the combat readiness training right before I deployed to Iraq. They ran everybody, at least in the Air Force, through like a week-long camp just to kind of remind you of what actual combat's going to be like. And I remember going through the fitness course, the confidence course, and all that stuff. And I was literally singing the GI Joe theme song as I went through it to keep spirits up and energy up, which my fellow class attendees got a big kick out of. The hard nosed military drill instructors that running the class, they didn't like it as much. They'd be like, "You're not taking this seriously," and I'm like, "Man, this is the only way I'm going to survive this stuff is if I make it a little bit fun." So some of it did bleed over.
So, okay, so let's talk fandom here, because again, I'm coming into this from the back door, 30 years late, having just dipped my toes in it when I was a little kid.
Right.
And you're going to these cons like I go to Star Trek cons and comic book cons. So, from somebody who's deep in it now, what are some things I should look for as a new collector? What are some things I should avoid? What are just some things I could have fun with?
Oh man, that's a broad question. First of all, my first instinct was you were already doing it right when you were little.
Okay.
If I was to take you with me to JoeLanta or Joe Fest or any of that, and we just sort of walked on the convention floor, there's just so much, and it's so overwhelming that I would just look at you and say, just go back to when you were a kid. And when you see something that you think is neat or cool, pursue that. Because there's so much, man. There is so much. To guide anybody in any direction. I mean, just to give you a tip of the iceberg here, tip of the iceberg. You have your standard 3 3/4 inch Joes. We talked about that. We talked about how you have 12-inch Joes, and there's just tons and tons of each one. Well, even within the 3 3/4 line, there's even spin-off lines. Like Hasbro got the license to do the Mortal Kombat figures, which are done in 3 3/4 scale, and some people consider them, because they're done exactly like Joe's. Some people consider them Joe's, some people don't. And then they got the Street Fighter license. So when I go to the cons, dude, I'm looking for those. I like that oddball because I love those games too. It's like a perfect cross section. It's Joe and Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat. But other collectors, my good friend Jim the Joe Junkie, who's actually a podcaster on our network about G.I. Joe, and he's a toy dealer at shows, that doesn't excite him. He's like, that's the weird offshoots. So that's just a small example of what I'm trying to tell you. There's just so much. I would tell you, just buy what you think looks cool, or look for those neat crossovers. If you dig Street Fighter and you're at a G.I. Joe con, hey, there's look for those Street Fighter guys, look for the Mortal Kombat guys, or maybe you're a video game guy. Hey, well, why don't we track down the NES games? There's 2 on the NES, I think 1 on the Atari 2600. there's been a couple Joe games here and there throughout the years. Let's go hunt those down. Joe kind of overlaps a lot of fandom. Maybe you're a board game player, tabletop. That exists as well. They recently came out with a GI Joe RPG, tabletop RPG. If you're into that, go for it. Maybe you're into comics. Man, the Joe comics are some of the best comics ever made. I might be biased, but see what I'm saying? There's so many avenues. Yeah, if you and I walked onto a floor together and you were just like, Jarrod, this is so much, I'd be like, yeah, it is. Maybe we should start with some of your favorites as a kid. Let's go see if we can find some of those. Let's see if we can find a warthog that you can take home today, that kind of thing, and just kind of let your passion spin out from there, because it can go in so many different ways.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely want to go back into some old boxes and see if there's any piece of these original warthogs still intact that I could just put that original one back together. By get my Rolling Thunder, or do I just have to buy them new and just call it good? Which I could do that too. And I say to myself, this thing here is not a small toy. I'm probably going to need some place to put it, so I need some sort of display. Should I Well, they had the flag. I mean, if I just start off with that, I mean, it's only downhill from there.
Yeah, if you start off with the USS Flagg, my friend, it is absolutely downhill from there. That is, most people consider the holy grail of all GI Joe toys. For those of you listening, if you're not familiar with GI Joe, it is a literally 6 foot long aircraft carrier. It's 6, maybe 7 feet long. It might actually be 7 feet long. It is insane how cool that is. I never had one. I never knew anyone who had one when I was a kid. I kicked myself on the daily because in 2001, I saw one at a flea market when I was in North Carolina, my first duty station, and they only wanted $250 for it back then. And that's an incredibly good deal, especially these days. But again, as my first duty station, I was a young second lieutenant. I didn't make a lot of money. So I was like, oh, be responsible. And in hindsight, I should have bought that thing.
I had a friend of mine from college on many, many episodes ago, and he revealed to me that one of our mutual friends had a flag underneath his bed in his dorm room.
Oh, man.
What the purpose for this was, I do not know, but I'm angry that he never told me about it.
Yeah, right? Just let me lay eyes on it. Like, it's a toy that you don't get to lay eyes on enough. Like I said, I go to these conventions all the time. When I go to the cons, even a big con, there might be 2, maybe 3 flags in the whole building because they're just that hard to come by. People don't part with them once they get them, especially. And of course, it was a huge high-end toy. I often kind of compare it to, in the He-Man world, they did Eternia playset, which was huge. And you can often find Grayskull, you can find Snake Mountain. Heck, you can even occasionally find the princess Cloud City. She had a Cloud City castle. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but the She-Ra's Cloud City castle. But you never see the dang Eternia because that thing was huge and awesome. They didn't sell as many of them. Harder to find.
Sure.
Yeah, man, flag. My friend Jim the Joe Junkie, he has one. When I podcast with him, it's right behind him in his screenshot where he sits. It sits right behind him.
Well, I just sat there saying, I need a place to put these things, and if that just becomes where they go, okay.
It is a great display piece for sure.
I actually didn't even know it existed when I was into them, but my thing at the time was I wanted the Defiant shuttle, which I never got within a country mile of that.
Yeah, I was just about to say the next best one was probably the Defiant, the giant space shuttle, which my buddy Jason had when I was in 6th, 7th grade. My buddy Jason Vega had that one, and so I get to go to his house and, oh my gosh, you've got the Defiant. I mean, I had some great sets, but these days I don't even collect the vehicles or anything like that. I strictly do figures just for space reasons. It takes up so much space to try to collect.
Okay, but you're the same guy who will come home from the thrift store with stacks of VHS tapes.
Listen, I can't explain everything.
Okay, I'm just saying, if I have a choice between a new Warthog and some VHS tapes.
Okay. All right, I'm going to reveal some Jarrod secrets here on your show. Everybody listen up. I do a 2 times a week run to my local Goodwill, and I do live in a military community, which is great because in the military community, people move a lot. People move in, people move out. It's a very moving community. So we get a lot of turnover at the Goodwill. So a lot of people message me, oh, I don't ever find anything at my Goodwill. It's always so stagnant. Military community helps with that. Anyway, yeah, I find big stacks of VHS tapes. All right, here's Jarrod's secret. They fall into, when I purchase these VHS tapes, into basically 4 categories. There's James Bond VHS tapes, which I just keep. Like, I have an ever growing, I don't care how many copies of Octopussy I have. If I find one, I'm buying it. And I think I have like, I don't know, 80 Bond VHS tapes now or something. It's closing in on 100. There's Bond, there's Batman. I also keep if it's Batman, Batman and Robin, Batman Forever, all the Batmans, I keep those. And that's slowly building. That's 2. 3 is like really weird, interesting, probably went straight to VHS back in the day. A lot of these haven't been ported over, never ported to DVD. They're just really oddball, weird B movies. Those I put in a container, and I actually watch them on my VCR out in my building out back. And those are for just like viewing. Like, I want to see this. Such a weird movie. I want to see this. I'm going to watch it. And then the 4th one, if you saw me buy it and it didn't fall into one of those 3 categories, I flipped it on eBay and made money. so a lot of them do get sold, but if it's Bond, Batman, or something really interesting, and the really interesting one, once I've watched it, then a lot of times I'll sell it. Like, for example, like 2 weeks ago, I watched this 1986 Police Academy knockoff movie out of Canada called Recruits. Mildly entertaining. I watched it and I was like, okay, because it was oddball. I'd never heard of it. And then after I got done watching, I popped it out. I scanned the code on eBay and said, oh, this VHS tape sells from anywhere from $15 to $30. I bought it for 50 cents. So I sold it. I saw it. I sold it. I'm good. So that's, now you know what Jarrod's doing with those VHS tapes. I'm not storing all of them.
I had wondered. I mean, I have to assume you have a plan. But I will admit that goes through my mind every time I see one of your hauls. I was like, where is he putting all this?
A lot of it, I would say, and this is just generally speaking here, and if you do follow me on X at YardSaleArtist, almost every time I do a run, I post what I bought, #YardSaleAdventures. And that way people can, if they want to follow me, they can, or they can just every once in a while want to check the #YardSaleAdventures. Go ahead and click on that. You'll see what I'm doing. I would say when you see me post a big lot of stuff like that, probably anywhere between 10 to 30% of it is kept, and the rest of it is probably sold. And I've been doing this since I've been doing the yard sale to eBay flip thing since for about almost 25 years now. And I just always like it. My wife enjoys it too, because we're both collectors, and it's neat to have a hobby that allows you to do that, and it pays for itself. You don't have to invest money because you're keeping this and you're selling that, and the money you made selling it covers the cost of what you bought. So it comes down to my cheapness at the end of the day, Aaron. So yeah, when I do find like GI Joe vehicles, I do sell them, just because, again, spatial reasons. I just do the figures. I'm always looking for figures, man. They're getting harder and harder to come by, Aaron. It's almost like I'm getting old.
Well, and also those things have been picked clean. Everybody's kind of figured out they are worth something to somebody.
Yeah, I find I have most success out there these days when I go to a Goodwill. A lot of Goodwills will do this thing where it's like a bundle bag full of just loose toys for like $1 or $2. And every once in a while, like, I grab a bundle bag and I'll really look at it, and I'll spot a GI Joe figure in there, and I'll buy the whole bag just to plunk that Joe out. and the last one I found was actually Smoke from the Mortal Kombat GI Joe crossover. I found a Smoke figure in a bundle bag like that. And I was like, hey, and the one before that was a real Ghostbusters. I found an Egon in a bundle bag, and I was like, yeah, I'll pay $1 for Egon. Yeah, why not? So yeah, that's kind of how you have to find them now, because you're right. The collectors, people have kind of figured it out. So it does get a little tough, but just got to keep on hitting those Goodwills and those yard sales, man.
But to wrap up here, I would be remiss if we didn't talk about the actual quality of the writing. You talked about the writer behind the comics and the show. But I mean, I've started to get back and actually rewatching the show, and I will probably get to the comics at some point too. But yeah, like, they really managed to do a good job within the constraints of a cartoon show aimed at a very young audience. They had some compelling storylines. They had some compelling dialogue. And they made efforts to say, for example, every time they had some sort of operation, they showed consequences of what was going on. They showed somebody got hurt. I think the medic was probably the most important person on the team because he was always busy.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, okay, so it's an interesting world that you talk about there because it's really two worlds. The comic book is actually much more, well, I use the much more. Let's just say more is more mature than the cartoon. The cartoon was run by like Buzz Dixon and a couple of other guys over at I think it was Sunbow. And they were very separate from what Larry was doing in the comics. They would complement and cross a bit, but yeah, the cartoon is definitely aimed at the lighter, the childlike, as you said. They always did have the usually had some kind of a lesson. Of course, they always had the knowing is half the battle lesson at the end of every episode. The comic has more consequences. There's much more actual death, serious injury. I mean, not a ton. I don't want you to think it's like the Nom or anything like that, but like there every once in a while a character will die. Like a beloved character will die, especially as the series went on. And Larry, Larry was the great writer for that comic. And again, he didn't do much on the cartoons. He had very little involvement in the cartoons. So they're two very different flavors. But Larry Hama himself is a Vietnam veteran from the Army Corps of Engineers, so he was the perfect guy. He'll joke and tell you, because this is true, toy books, Marvel would do toy books, toy book tie-ins. He was like, they always gave the toy books to the losers. He's like, yeah, Larry Hama's a loser, give him a GI Joe. But you get the right guy who's in the military, and he can write it with this authenticity and take it a little more seriously. So you end up getting a book that is still running to this day. Like, it ran at Marvel for 155 issues. It did go kind of into quietness for almost 7 years before Devil's Due picked it up. Devil's Due ran it for 5, 6, 7, a good handful of years. It got quiet a little bit, and then IDW picked it up, and they brought Larry Hama back, and Larry Hama wrote another 100 or so issues. It's still going, and if you think about 80s, there was a lot of toy, like I said, toy book crossovers. We immediately think of Transformers, which was also highly successful. Not quite as successful as Joe. I think it ran 85 issues, but then again, it got picked up by different. It's never really like Joe. It's never really been out of print. And Turtles, of course, did that. But for every one of those, you have like Sectars or Crystar. And those are all good books, but is like the market was flooded with toy books. I mean, if we put our brains together, we could think of a bunch more right now, just using those as examples. But Larry was just that strong writer with the strong background. I mean, he ended up not even just being the GI Joe guy, but he was the writer on Wolverine for a long time, and he was the editor on that Nom book I was talking about. And Larry's written a bunch of stuff, so he's kind of this cool hidden talent that Marvel found thanks to this toy line out there. But anyway, again, my main point was your comic. For your listeners, if you kind of want to dabble into GI Joe, your cartoons, they're going to be fun. You can put them on with your 8, 9, 10-year-old kids, watch them, have a good time. They're silly, bonkers fun with a little bit of a lesson in them. Comic is much more serious with more consequences. I would say they'd probably be more appreciated by a kid who's probably 11, 12, 13, all the way up to, let's say, 48 years old, like I am. So, that's kind of your range for the flavor of the story. You're gonna regret asking me questions, Aaron, because I just answer for like 4 minutes.
See, you're the guest here. I mean, it's your place to do that. If I'm the one doing all the talking, this is not a great show as far as.
I'm gonna flip it on you. You mentioned that we know that you liked Sergeant Slaughter, the Triple T. Yeah, let's hit a couple of you. Like, who are your maybe top 3 favorite Joes?
Well, easily, I would say Gung Ho was
Oh, you
one of
gotta
my
love Gung
favorite
Ho.
back in the day, especially in the dress blues.
Oh, I was just gonna say, if you were aware of the dress blue, but again, of course you would because that's when you were. He was the second version of Gung Ho.
That's
Yeah, he comes in an actual real military uniform, which I think is fantastic. Yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
that's all right. That's all right. I would say what I'd want now, not necessarily what I was into back in the day, but I definitely want to pick up some of the Star Brigade figures.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Um, and I said I really want to grab any that are based on real people, like the Rowdy Roddy Piper and that sort of thing, just because the weirdness of that. I was always wanting to get the Street Fighter and the Mortal Kombat ones. I'm not sure I have a top three,
Mhm.
but I really do want to just get the good mix of the ones I feel are interesting.
Oh, I love that, man. I love that you're not tied to too much there. But yeah, that's I've never met someone who was like, I'm gonna find those Star Brigade figures. So I actually love that about you. And I'm not bagging on
No,
Star
no,
Brigade.
because
It's just a weird kind of offshoot, but I dig it. I have a few of them. I have a few of the Star
the
Brigade.
Star Brigade, like I remember that was something that kind of came out when I was already very knee deep in Turtles, and it was like, oh, that kind of looks cool, but I can't afford to buy both, and I'm really into Turtles now. And then I looked because as a toy collector now, I'm at conventions and like I decided that hot pink was the color for the next GI Joe wave. I mean,
Turtles decided that because yeah, like I said, I got to talk to a lot of the guys who were designing, and they were like, "Yeah, we were absolutely chasing the Turtles dollars at some point because
yeah,
it was so bright." Now, I do want to. I'll bring up another fun fact. You may have already know this. Maybe it's for the listeners. You said you like to collect figures of that have real people. A lot, and I mean a lot of the GI Joe characters are
hmm
designed after real people. A ton of them are employees at Hasbro.
hmm
To have a look or their names, the names on their file cards are real names of employees at Hasbro. In fact, we talked about Larry Hama being the creator of almost all the lore of GI Joe. The figure Tunnel Rat is physically designed to look like
I
Larry.
had a tunnel rat as a kid.
Yeah, he's basically Larry. And yeah, like if you go look at Torpedo from Wave 2, the diver guy, his name is something Aloha, and he's a Pacific Islander. And it comes back to the inker, one of the inkers that worked with Larry on the book. His name is Steve Aloha. So it's like it's all these real people are mixed into GI Joe. Now I get what you're saying. You're saying
Yeah.
like, they are the like Sergeant Slaughter, like public personalities. I get what
Or
you're saying.
the Matt Tracker figure. I have to get that damn thing.
Oh man, yeah. I don't think I have a Matt Tracker. I have a sizable collection of the figures, but I don't think I have Matt Tracker. He is cool. That's a nice crossover with Mask.
hmm
What a great toy line.
Now, as we're wrapping this up, I'm going to have to ask you because we've talked about the people behind the show and the people behind the line. Have you read the book Voice Lessons by Rob Paulson?
I have not. I'm unfamiliar with it completely.
Okay. I Rob Paulson was behind several Ninja Turtle projects. He was also on GI Joe as I believe Snow Job.
Okay.
Okay, he was the voice actor for that. He was Raphael on the original run of Ninja Turtles, Donatello. Okay.
Ah.
He wrote a book called Voice Lessons where he talks about his journey as a voice actor before that was cool. And he spends a lot of
Right.
time talking about like, this has only been cool in like maybe the last 10 years at most.
Oh yeah,
Before
absolutely. Yeah.
and he talks about because he was on Animaniacs as well. And they went through this phase where they were thinking of bringing back Animaniacs. And right when it was about to hit go time, he found out he had throat cancer.
Yeah.
And it was a case of where he was not like he wasn't definitely going to die, but they were like, this is not good, and you put off getting treatment for way too long.
Mm.
You're a voice actor, so the chances of you having the same voice when you're done are not good.
Yeah.
And he's got his best friends there who, if he dies, they don't have work because they can't do the show without him. So
Oof.
he's talking about a lot of, you know, great stories about going into the industry, but it's like, and now I have all this on my plate as to how do I pull out of this in one piece? because these are, his best friends he's working with. And I strongly recommend the book because, I mean, no matter what's going on in your life, you're probably going to find something in there to put it in perspective. And this is just a great conversation to throw that out there.
Oh, I love it. That is really really cool. And you're absolutely right about voice actors. I just started, my art career and convention appearances back in 2015-ish is when I started that post-military art career. And yeah, even then there was like very few voice actors, but over the last it's definitely got more and more and more and more and more. I think anime had a lot to do with that. I see a lot of anime voice actors, but yeah, it's neat to see a lot of these Joe voice actors are coming out of the woodwork and getting some love and limelight. And we come across them every once in a while at a con, so we get them to do a voice drop for the show. My GI Joe podcast. So we get them to, hey, this is Flint, and you're listening to it. And I just love that they're getting love again, because it wasn't cool. It wasn't Hollywood cool for a long time, but finally we grew up and realized their value, and I think that's great.
Yeah. And I'll also throw this out there for you, if you're going to take my advice, or anybody who's listening. Normally, when I recommend a book, I will just say read it any way you can. If you're the kind of person who likes a big piece of dead tree, do that. If you want the ebook, that's great. If you want the audio version, that's great. I'm going to actually just once exercise my preference here. I'm going to say, if you want to read this book, the best way to do it is to get the audio book. Because while he's going through this, when Rob talks about the characters he does, he will do it in character.
Nice.
He will do Donatello as Donatello, Raphael as Raphael, and so on and so forth. And it adds that much more to the story.
Oh, I can imagine. That's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. I will also bring a book of less consequence and heftiness. I was recently put onto the fact that I knew not so long ago they came out with a book called The Art of Joe, The Art of GI Joe. I'll make sure I get that title right. Give me 1 second. I think it's just The Art of GI Joe, and it's all the toy art. Yeah, Art of GI Joe. It's all the toy art, from the boxes to the figures and all that. It's even toys that never came out, early designs, prototypes, behind the scenes sketches. If you loved the art, if you thought the packaging on those things were great, and I did, this book, it's huge, it's heavy. I almost regret ordering it because I don't know where the hell I'm going to put it. but I don't regret it though, because it has every bit of art from the entire GI Joe line is in this book. It came out a couple years ago. Its starting price was like $175. They recently decided to drop it down to clear out their warehouse. You can get it now for $99.99. It's $100. So if you're listening to this and you're a Joe guy and you just want to go back and look at all that beautiful box art and all that stuff, highly recommend the Art of GI Joe.
Okay. I'll put that in the show notes and everything else we talked about. Where can people find you on the web and follow your adventures?
I can be found on social medias at YardSaleArtist. That's X, Facebook, and Instagram, and it's all at YardSaleArtist. If you're more interested in my podcasting, I podcast on the Longbox Crusade, and that's at Longbox Crusade, X, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. And over there, we do have a show called GI Joe Chronicles, where we are going through the Devil's Due run and a little bit of the Marvel stuff as well. So feel free to join us on Longbox Crusade, or if you just want to chat with me, it's at YardSaleArtist.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jarrod. I would glad to have you back anytime. We always have a good time.
I love talking to you. Time goes by so fast when I talk to you. I feel like we could just go a couple hours, but thank you so much for having me. Thank you for the listeners who tuned into Aaron's awesome show. I'm always proud to be part of it.